Welcome to this special Easter recess edition of FedNet, the only podcast featuring news conferences from the United States Congress. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy was joined by Texas Congressman Greg Casar in the Senate recording studio back on March 17 to introduce their banning event training on sensitive operations and Federal Functions Act. The Bets Off Act would prohibit prediction markets like Kalshi and Polymarket from hosting bets on government actions and where insiders control outcomes. The following material is protected by copyright.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Glad to be joined by my friend, Representative Greg Casar from the House of Representatives. We are introducing legislation today entitled Banning Event Training on Sensitive Operations and Federal Functions, the Bets Off Act. This is long overdue legislation which would prohibit these prediction markets like Kalshi and Polymarket from offering markets to allow people to bet on government action and on markets where there is one individual that controls the outcome of the bet. These are fundamentally corrupt markets. They are rife with insider trading, and they offer incredibly perverse incentives, especially inside government, for government actors to push official decision-making towards their financial interests. I want to give you maybe the most stark example of why this legislation is necessary. Right before the U.S. attacks on Iran, there was a flurry of activity on Polymarket. In fact, the day before the strikes began, there was a series of very specific bets that were made. These bets put money down on the United States attacking Iran the following day. Now, this was not a frequent bet that was made on Polymarket. It was, in fact, a very exceptional day where there were many bets made on this specific prediction that U.S. military action against Iran would occur the next day. Those bets paid off to the tune of over $100,000 at a minimum for each of the individuals who placed those bets. Most of those accounts were set up on the day that they made those bets. It seems pretty clear what happened. People inside the White House or very close to the White House with knowledge of the attack that was imminent cashed in. That is fundamentally corrupt, and it is frankly stunning to people that it is legal, that it is allowed for these prediction markets to allow for bets to be made on such consequential questions like war and peace. And so our legislation is pretty simple. It simply says that these markets cannot allow people to make bets on government decision-making and, frankly, on other instances where there is one single individual who controls and knows the outcome of a market. I'll give you another example, much more benign, but still fundamentally corrupt. You can place bets today based upon what words a particular politician or celebrity will say in public remarks. Well, of course, there's one person who knows the answer to that question, the person making the speech. And there's a series of people around that individual who know the answer as well. So when people know how a bet is going to play out, it's an easy opportunity for them to make money. But these markets make it seem as if these predictions are on the level. They are not. And so gullible consumers get conned into placing bets on markets where the outcome is knowable. where they are essentially bound to lose. So I'm glad that we are able to come together, House and the Senate, and introduce this legislation. I think it's long overdue and urgent. Urgent because these markets are exploding. Urgent because the Trump administration is clearly making money off of these markets. Urgent because the harm isn't just to consumers, it's to every single citizen. Because think about what's happening inside the Situation Room. There are likely people who have placed bets on whether the United States is going to take a particular military action overseas. And they are, inside Trump's White House, giving advice to the president, not based on what's best for national security, but based upon what will make them money. That's unforgivable. And it's why we need to pass this legislation now. Finally, before I turn it over to Greg, let me just sort of step back for a second, and ask a question. What happens to us spiritually when every moral question in this country just becomes a market? Right? Don't we lose something? Don't we rot a little bit inside when the question of famine in Gaza isn't a question of what's right and what's wrong, but whether you can make money or lose money? I think it's really important that there are certain matters that are not monetized by prediction markets, whether that be humanitarian disaster overseas or the fundamental moral question of whether we go to war or not. Those heavy, weighty public policy questions, steeped in questions of morality, become empty and corrupted if they just become a money-making opportunity for people. So I'm glad to be here introducing this legislation. I hope that there'll be bipartisan support. Obviously, there's a flurry of these bills being introduced right now because the activity is ramped up so quickly. But in talking to my Republican colleagues, many of them see the grave danger here as well. And while they may be a little bit slower to introduce these bills, I do think there's an opportunity for us to be able to work together here. At least I hope so. So let me turn it over to Greg.
Thank you, Chris. I really want to thank Senator Murphy for his really important leadership on an issue that becomes more urgent by the day. Right now, America is facing a corruption crisis. After promising to drain the swamp, Donald Trump has ushered in the most corrupt administration in American history. And across the political spectrum, Americans are fed up with a government that over and over and over again answers to the wealthy and well-connected instead of ordinary people. This bill is about cracking down on one of the most dangerous new venues for government corruption, and that's in prediction markets. On the day before the Iran war, 150 accounts placed highly unusual bets on Polymarket that the war would start the next day. 109 of those accounts made over $10,000 betting on the war. 16 made over $100,000, and one person made nearly $500,000. $500,000 from betting on the start of a war that has cost billions of taxpayer dollars, over a dozen lives of U.S. service members, and countless more civilians. While working-class kids were getting sent to fight and die in the Middle East, others were cashing in, and they either got very lucky or they were privy to very secret inside information. I expect most Americans don't need a list of the reasons why this is wrong and dangerous, but let me give you just a few. We shouldn't live in a country where someone's sitting in the Situation Room making decisions about whether to invade or to bomb, decisions about war and peace, life and death, that those decisions could be driven by the fact that they have hundreds of thousands of dollars riding on the decision. We shouldn't live in a country where government officials or well-connected people can make money off of secret information that is supposed to be used in the public interest. And we shouldn't live in a country where a foreign power can guess what Donald Trump is going to do next by going to a betting market. While we don't know the names of the people who, with insider information, correctly bet on the Iran war, we do know that, like with basically every other corruption story in Washington, D.C., that the Trump family is getting a cut. Donald Trump Jr. is an investor in Polymarket, a paid advisor to Kalshi, and he's starting to work on Truth Predict, the Trump's very own corruption machine in prediction markets. Needless to say, I don't think this administration is going to be cracking down on this form of corruption anytime soon, since they're cashing in on it. The potential for corruption in these markets goes well beyond wars, and so does our bill. No one would join a poker game where one player gets to know what's in every other player's hand. No one would sit at a craps table where one player gets to pick how the dice land. But that's how many prediction markets today work. From the Super Bowl halftime show to the length of a White House press conference, people are allowed to bet on events where someone knows and already controls the outcome. And when that happens, these markets become just another avenue for the powerful and well-connected to screw over everyone else. If you bet on who's performing at the Super Bowl halftime show and lose your money to someone who controlled the answer, you're getting ripped off. And the people at the very top are making money off of it. And that's wrong. The CEOs of this company have made clear that they want to go even further, to an America where the entire country is a casino and the rich and the powerful always win. Congress must act before we get there. I want to thank Senator Murphy again for his great leadership on this issue, and my House colleagues who are helping co-lead the bill with me, Gabe Amo and Yasmin Ansari. Thanks so much, and I'll turn it over to you, Chris, or to y'all for questions.
Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
It's pretty well documented what online gambling is doing to Americans' wallets, especially young men. So why limit this to corruption or manipulation? Why not just ban it outright?
So there are a number of different pieces of legislation that are being introduced as we speak. I hope that we will take a comprehensive look at the way that prediction markets are rigging our entire economy and government action. So I know there's legislation that will be introduced to restrict prediction markets in sports betting. Senator Merkley has legislation that would restrict the way that prediction markets can offer bets on elections. So I think there'll be a suite of pieces of legislation that will allow us to take a more comprehensive look. For my part, this bill doesn't cover the waterfront in terms of what is concerning in these markets, but this seems to be the most urgent problem right now because there is such obvious deep corruption happening inside this White House. And as Greg pointed out, this White House and the friends and family of the president are clearly making a mint off of these corrupt prediction markets.
Yeah, we can debate at length how we handle prediction markets generally, but at a minimum, shouldn't we be able to agree that somebody shouldn't be able to place 17 bets on the halftime show and win all of them? I mean, to me, that seems like a place where Democrats, Republicans, everybody can come together and say, that's nuts. So we should, at a minimum, be able to pass my bill here with Senator Murphy.
Setting aside the government actions portion of this, I mean, as you both know, that this would also ban betting on things like the Oscars, Super Bowl halftime show. Obviously, there are insider trading risks there that you spoke about, but also, I mean, these sorts of things are growing very much in popularity. A lot of Americans like placing these bets. I'm just curious if you wonder, or are you worried at all about ending up on the wrong side of public opinion by going after those things?
Well, I'll let you say a version of what we were talking about in the other room. I do think there's an assumption from the public that these markets are not rigged. I mean, wouldn't the government protect consumers from markets that were transparently rigged? And to another point that Greg has made, the people who benefit in these markets are always the powerful. I mean, let's be honest. The people who know who's going to perform at the Super Bowl, the people who know what words the president is going to use in a speech are very powerful people. These prediction markets aren't offering bets on what your neighbor is going to have for breakfast tomorrow morning. It's not regular people who have the inside information. It's the rich and connected and powerful that have the inside information. So yes, I think there's a good question as to why do so many people end up placing bets on markets that clearly are rigged. And there's probably complicated answers to that question. But one of them is probably that people might not know that they're being offered bets on markets that clearly have inside information.
Yeah, to this point, I think we should have the ability for folks to go to a casino and play a poker game or play a game of roulette. But we have rules that say the House cannot rig the poker game. So when people get on their phone and see these prediction markets, they expect that there are rules to make sure the game isn't rigged against them. And so I think that voters would clearly stand with us saying, we want to make sure that you aren't betting on a rigged poker game.
You mentioned there's a flurry of bills already on this, so I just wanted to clarify that this is more so on stipulating what kinds of bets and trades there are and not on the regulatory side of it, because I think Senator Blumenthal has a bill on wanting to go back to states and not just being housed completely federally with the CFTC, so I just wanted to clarify the difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of ways that you could approach this question. Obviously, you could put, and we should put, penalties on individuals who work for the government who are placing bets on these markets with inside information. But this legislation is simpler and broader in that it just simply says these markets should not exist in cases where the market is clearly rigged because there's an individual inside government who knows and controls the outcome, or there's a private individual who knows and controls the outcome. And listen, I mean, there will still be an infinite number of places where people can make bets. What we're saying is that when the market is inherently and almost certainly rigged, that should be a place where people are protected from what is, pretty regularly outright fraud.
This is for either of you, but you mentioned this earlier, Representative Casar, about this is an issue that both sides can get behind. But it seems that this bill and all the other bills proposed on prediction markets have been led by Democrats. Have you reached out to your Republican colleagues on this? And if so, do they seem amenable to working with you on this?
Listen, I think that this is a really hard issue for Republicans right now because their cult leader is cashing in off these prediction markets. I just want to be honest. I mean, right now, there's not a lot of evidence that Republicans are willing to stand up to President Trump when he's making money corruptly. I mean, obviously, this is just one of many ways in which every single day the president is cashing in on his position. Republicans weren't willing to stand up and say the gift of a luxury plane by a foreign government was wrong. Republicans weren't willing to stand up and say the offering of a meme coin so as to facilitate secret payoffs to the president was wrong. They haven't been willing to say that the kids sitting on all sorts of corporate boards that are surprisingly getting massive new government contracts is wrong. And they probably won't say that the people surrounding the president making money off of decisions of war and peace is wrong. But, our hope is that Donald Trump won't control that party forever. Maybe we'll be able to make a breakthrough in the short run, but I do think in my private conversations with Republicans, they recognize that these markets are inherently corrupt. And let's start having the conversation now so that eventually, under the right circumstances, we might be able to protect people.
Yeah, on exactly that note, I just wondered if you had a comment on the Trump family's other side deals since the start of the war. The Trump brothers going to the drone business, Jared Kushner soliciting investments from Gulf leaders while negotiating peace. The opportunity for profiteering this was given.
This is the most corrupt administration in American history, and they find even wars where kids are dying as an opportunity to make a profit. Trump said right at the beginning of this war that oil prices going up would be a, quote, small price to pay. Well, for Trump, everything's a small price to pay because he never pays it. It's not his kids that are getting shipped off to the Middle East. His kids are too busy cashing in. It's not his budget that's getting stretched thin by surging gas prices. It's millions of Americans. And while we're being told that there's not enough money for people to have health care, he's spending billions of dollars on this regime change war in the Middle East, and it sounds like he and his kids are finding even more ways to have some of those billions of dollars for themselves.
Yeah, his chief economic advisor said today that consumers are the last thing they think about when it comes to this war. The first thing they think about is cashing in, right? This is a White House that is a 24/7 cash grab, right? They have decided that they are going to spend most of their days operationalizing the White House to make money, and they will use any opportunity, any mechanism available to them to make that money, including sending our young men and women overseas to die in war. It's pretty disgusting. And I just, hope that this country doesn't become normalized to it. Again, these charts are pretty stunning. I mean, the idea that there are likely dozens of people sitting in the White House as we speak, listening for inside information and then going onto their phones and placing bets, or even worse, placing bets and then trying to manipulate outcomes to make themselves money is unprecedented. And though we don't know who these people are, it's just patently clear, given the way that these bets were placed and other bets have been placed, another example being the lead up to the war in Venezuela, that there's a lot of people inside that White House that are using these prediction markets to enrich themselves corruptly. And of course they are, because the tone is set from the top. When the president is using his office every single day to cash in, then he is clearly sending a signal to everybody who works at the White House that they should also use their time close to power in order to cash in for themselves.
If I could ask another, obviously it's a ban on non-financial government actions, and you have some language in here where if the underlying characteristic of the action is not financial, commercial, or economic. I guess could you speak a little bit to the carve out there with financial?
Yeah, so there are legitimate markets that have existed for a long time in which individuals are essentially placing bets on government action. For instance, bets, trades made based upon which way you believe the Federal Reserve will move interest rates. So we do try to carve out protection for existing mainstream financial markets under this bill. What we're really trying to get at are these new prediction markets based on non-financial decisions made by the federal government. So, all right, great. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without express written permission from FedNet is prohibited. Thanks for listening to this FedNet podcast.